Hello all, good evening. I am Sonal Pandey, a research scholar from IIT Indore and the project leader for TMYS Review March 2021 on Artists and Afterlives. This issue is very special to us as it is our little effort to actually pay the tribute to the bygone artist of 2020. And in this series of talks, we are going to talk about the late actor and youth icon Sushant Singh Rajput. I would like to let our readers know that these essays are actually available on Amazon worldwide and Kindle services. So please take a look at them. And for today's discussion, we have with us our esteemed panelist, Dr. Somnath Batabyal. He is the chief mentor for this issue and the chairperson of the Global Center for Media and Communication at SOS University London, and has also been an award-winning investigative journalist. And we have Mr. Shantanu Chowdhary, an editor at HarperCollins India, who is also responsible for launching this cinema, culture, and music imprint, and has also published a book called Icons of Bollywood. And we have with us Mr. Bhaskar Chaudhary, a graduate of Young India Fellowship and Mumbai University, who has contributed the paper on Sushant Singh Rajput, Mani and Mansoor, hints at the potential of non-normative masculinities on screen. So, Mr. Chaudhary is the moderator for today's session. I would like to request him to take it from here and ask the mentor and the contributor the questions and the feedback. Mr. Chaudhary, please.
Thank you, Sonal. Thank you for the introduction, and it's a wonderful pleasure and sort of honor to be here at this very well thought out project that TMYS has come up with. I'd like to thank TMYS for the initiative and for asking me to moderate a few sessions here. Um, Sadly, this session, talks about somebody who I think left us too soon. Any artist leaving us at any point of time is a matter of great sorrow, because they give us a world, they create a world for us that we escape to, and with every artist who passes, that world comes to a close, and the worlds that they would have created come to a close. And with Sushant, I think 33 is no age to go, and go like the way he did. Uh, it's been quite a revelation to read Bhaskar's essay on how the couple of films that we're going to discuss here, Kedarnath and Dil Bechara, have sort of and Sushant's performance and his characters in these films have sort of uh, tried to redefine what we have come to mean by masculinity in Hindi cinema. Bhaskar, thank you so much for this essay, and I must say it's a very good job done. And Somnath, of course, Somnath and I go back a long, long way. And
when you were actually at Harper.
When I was actually at Harper, like so it's been, guys, yeah. So it's good to have you as the mentor for the essay and for this particular episode. And so welcome, and let's get it started. Somnath, I'll start with you as the mentor for the thing. Do you think, film with the kind of essay that Bhaskar has, where he is addressing uh, shades of masculinity in Hindi cinema, is there adequate attention to the film scholarship of this kind, or does Hindi cinema, particularly mainstream cinema, because we're talking about a mainstream film icon, like somebody like Sushant. Do you think there's sufficient attention to film scholarship, or mainstream cinema opens itself up to this kind of film scholarship?
Thanks, Shantanu. Just before I address your question, I'd like to thank TMYS for organizing this. It's quite a revelation that projects like this are starting up. Bhaskar, thank you for your essay. It was a pleasure reading it, and I'll come to the particularities of it in a bit. Shantanu, again, as we said, you're an old comrade. It's lovely to see you. I don't get to see you these days except at literature festivals. This is an online one. But to come to the question, there is, I mean, on one hand, yes, there is quite a bit of scholarship which has been around the notions of both masculinity and femininity in Indian films. Uh, since the 90s, the 2000s, there has been quite a bit of work done. But if you ask the question, is it enough? Is given that Bollywood produces the most number of films in the world, whatever that means, given its huge outreach, its influence, the scholarly work is very limited. I think there's one thing which has definitely happened and is really gratifying to note is that there's a lot being written about popular cinema by journalists, by authors. You, Shantanu, included in that. You've done an amazing amount of work to bring film icons in front of us. So there's a lot of, if I might use that word, popular work being done on Bollywood and the film industry as such. But when we think of scholarly work, work which looks at practice through the lens of theory, both film theory, sociology, cultural studies, that's perhaps not as much. There's a lot, again, there are scholars, and if you go like Ashish Rajadhyaksha, here Rachel Dwyer, Rosie Harris. There's quite a bit of stuff done, but not enough is where I would put it. And therefore, work like Bhaskar's and what TMYS has started to do and proposing to do is very encouraging. I must say that despite so much of so many more avenues to write today, given the internet and digital technologies available, there's not a corresponding increase in serious, grounded, critical analysis and of Bollywood.
Yeah, Somnath, will come back to you, and in the interest of keeping this a free-flowing conversation rather than me butting in with questions, at any point of time, Somnath, as the mentor, please feel free to ask Bhaskar any related questions that you might have. Bhaskar, thank you, and just to begin. What was it about these two films in particular that sort of, like, was this something that TMYS dictated that you take up these two films, or was it something you did on your own? Okay, among his, among the icons who passed away, these are the two films I'd like to sort of because even if you look at his other film Dhoni, there's a certain this kind of look at masculinity that you are experimenting with in the essay, something of that even in Dhoni. So I think that Sushant's whole demeanor lent itself to these kind of characters. But what was it about these two films that made you choose this as something to write on?
Okay, so firstly, I would also like to thank TMYS for giving me this opportunity. And to get to the question straight away, when you write something in the form of an academic essay, it ends up seeming complicated at the first glance. But the idea behind the essay for me was very simple. All throughout my childhood, I have seen my fair share of Hindi films, and I'm a boy who doesn't find his voice ever represented in cinema or in a narrative. And I think as I grew up, I just subconsciously internalized that the way I feel about my gender or my emotions or my personality is not something that mainstream media is going to represent. So as I grew up, I just subconsciously internalized this that I'm not supposed to expect anything pertaining to me on the screen. So when I first saw the film Kedarnath, there was some moments in the film which particularly intrigue me. So, in general, I think my essay reflects this idea that usually films do not give space to male characters to have very complicated emotions, or even when it does, it's not like the space for complicated emotions is not, or tender emotions, it's not there. It's just that we associate manliness so rigidly with action or strength that we forget that a human being cannot be that at all moments, and to expect someone to be that at all moments is oppressive. So the idea behind writing the essay simply was that I the the disconnect between my own personality and the gender-based ideas which I always saw films reflecting in childhood, I wanted to reveal that gap through my writing. So my basic claim is that media does not represent the voices of all boys and men. So when you show a male character, I don't think he's just a person. I think at some level, he's also a representation of a gender. So I really don't understand why does a man always have to be in action, or if he's suffering through some kind of heartbreak, why does the narrative always have to channelize it in some kind of violent or vigorous action? Or if there's a depiction of a romantic affair, then why does the man always have to be very actively involved in a chase? Because like there could be a lot of dimensions to a human being, and why is
So,
a state of
so
emotional.
are you trying to say that the current depiction of does the current depiction of masculinity have any scope for tender feelings and emotional complexity in male characters? Do you think that's absent? How?
I think I think it's completely absent, and I also think that I was honestly very surprised when I saw the film Kedarnath. But I'm going to be very honest. When I saw the film for the first time, I also had this question that is anybody else even noticing what I'm seeing? Was this something which the makers of the film deliberately put over there, or did it happen by an accident? And because of the socio-cultural environment in which I have grown up in, intuitively I'm more inclined to believe that it was an accident, because I've hardly ever seen anybody challenging notions of masculinity. So my instincts trigger me to believe that it was some kind of an accident, a very happy accident. I'm not sure whether someone deliberately put this kind of thought into changing the mold of masculinity. But yes, Kedarnath was in that way an outlier, because otherwise I see the possibility of complicated male emotions being completely absent in cinema.
Yeah, so, in what we'll come back to that a little later. Somnath, what do you think of Bhaskar's take on Kedarnath? Do you think it's an accidental thing, or do you think it's something that the filmmakers, from your reading of his essay, or from if you watch the film, from your reading of the film?
Uh, I mean, I don't think Kedarnath is an accident, or the portrayal is an accident, Shantanu. Simply because I think there's a logical process to which has led to the emergence of a character like Sushant Singh Rajput and his portrayal of it in Kedarnath. We see that what you mentioned, this that he embodies non-aggressive male persona, even in Kaipoche, which I
Yeah.
really enjoyed. His character was one of which doesn't embody what the typical male hero of the 70s and definitely the 80s. So there is, but what I might not question, but my doubts are when we think of Kedarnath as an accident, because then it puts it outside the known paradigm. I don't think that is the case. I think there's a gradual movement in how male characters have developed in Bollywood. There have been leaps and bounds, of course, and there have been loads of times we have fallen back to known narratives. But look, I mean, I can go into a long critique of this, but
Yeah.
the point remains that even if you start off putting the stereotype of the angry young man, and perhaps Shantanu, you'll bring me back to this later, and
Yeah.
on the opposite side, Sushant Singh Rajput, a lot has happened through
Exactly.
the 70s, 80s. I mean, the 80s is a lost case. Let's forget that. The 90s, the start of the romantic movement comes again with Maine Pyar Kiya. Is that? No, not Maine Pyar Kiya. What is that?
Dilwale Dulhaniya, Dilwale Dulhaniya.
That's a bit later. What is the Amir Khan movie? The first one.
Qyamat se Qyamat tak.
Right. The re-emergence of the boy next door comes back.
Yeah.
And Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge is a real good one to mention here, because we see in Raj, Shah Rukh Khan's character, the effort to be non-aggressive. The fact that he'll not fight, the physical fight, he'll try and please everyone. He's not taking on the Amitabh Bachchan, if I may use that term loosely, that route. I mean, of course, the narrative makes him claims him back. He's brought back into mainstream hegemony. Even his attempts fail. So, in a sense, Sushant Singh Rajput's character manages to do what Dilwale Dulhaniya couldn't do, what Raj couldn't do, Mansoor does. So, but this is a movement. It's not an accident. I mean, look, let me talk about a film which I really enjoyed in 2009. If you look post Dilwale Dulhaniya, if you look at Do Paise Ki Dhoop, Char Aane Ki Barish, Dipti Nawal's film, Rajat Kapoor plays a brilliant role. He's openly gay in the film. It's not a mainstream film. It's an outlier film in that sense, but it's part of the narrative from Hindi films, which is allowing us to question the stereotypes and all these narratives. Slowly, we've been pushing the borders quite. I mean, I wouldn't use the word consistently, but there have been actors and directors and producers who have been pushing this envelope. Sushant Singh Rajput is not, again, let me insist, is not an accident, but he stands on the shoulders of his predecessors.
Absolutely. Bhaskar, one of the things that Somnath mentions, and that brings to my mind, you are of the current generation, and you have grown up, I would assume, with films in the last 20-25 years. But this character that you're talking about, both Mansoor and in Dil Bechara, the kind of character has been a very substantial part of Hindi cinema. And I hate to use the word Bollywood because I think that's a bastardization and for the longest time, if you look at the 50s, you had Dilip Kumar, the ultimate you had the ultimate, not only the tragedy queen, he sort of made a virtue of not fighting, sort of giving up on life or accepting what in a graceful manner, even if it means destroying oneself, which is what both Kedarnath and Dil Bechara's characters do. So Dilip Kumar was there in the 60s. Yeah, in the 60s, you had Rajendra Kumar, who shed tears at the drop of a, I think I haven't heard a song in as tremulous a voice as Mohammad Rafi in Barsat, in that wonderful film of 1962 with Rajendra Kumar's Mohammad Rafi's voice really trembling with tears. So there was Rajendra Kumar. Of course, you had Shammi Kapoor to sort of offset that. In the 60s, late 60s, just before Amitabh Bachchan cleared the field for everybody, you had Rajesh Khanna actually being very teary-eyed. You had, and then even Amitabh Bachchan, for all his manliness, for all his aggressiveness he brought in, there was a sort of core softness that he had. His eyes, when he talked of his mother, there's something. So I think, barring the 1980s, which sort of accelerated Amitabh Bachchan's angry young type to extreme limits, Hindi cinema has always had this. So, have you considered that in terms of framing Sushant Rajput in the context that you do? In fact, Mani, for example, Dil Bechara is in many ways Anand revisited. Like the kind of exuberance he brings to uh, the subject of death is sort of. I'm looking at Anand all over again. So, Bhaskar, come on that.
So before responding, I want to clarify two things. Firstly, I grew up mostly in the 2000s and decades, so all the films which I have seen belong to that era. So, and secondly, whatever comments I make, I'm making them mostly as a consumer of films and as some. I think, irrespective of how much or how less you watch films, films and the cultural ideas present in it affect you as a person. And when you're a
Yeah,
child, they affect you even more. So my comments mostly come from my experiences in my childhood of watching films and now reflecting back upon how they affected me. So I haven't done any scholarly study of different eras. So I would not be able to make an intellectual comment like that. But as a consumer of films, particularly in the 2000 and late 90s era, which I have seen, what I'm trying to say is that, okay, so there are different shades of masculinity. Nobody is saying that in every film you have the hero very aggressively fighting action scenes or being very loud, there are gentler versions of masculinity. And like,
absolutely. Gentler versions are there. In fact, the fact that I mentioned Dilip Kumar or Rajendra Kumar or Rajesh Khanna, they are exceptions. They are probably the sole exceptions in decades which had only masculinity of the kind that you sort of talked about. Yes, please go on. Yeah.
okay, so I would not be able to comment about that era at all. So
No, no.
I'm
So
like,
your
as a
era is.
consumer. So what I'm trying to say is that there are different shades of masculinity, and I no doubt, like the example of Raj in DDLJ which you gave, it's a much gentler version of masculinity. I'm not simply talking about being non-aggressive or gentle over here. I'm talking about being unconventional. I'm saying that there are certain things which we take for granted whenever we think about a boy or a man on screen. One of them being that he would always want to win it all. He would always, in the end, know how to control the situation. He would, even if there's a moment of loss, he would know how to recover. And that's obviously, for most people, I'm sure that's a very attractive state of being in. I'm speaking as someone who felt very vulnerable and helpless due to different life circumstances. And I often wondered why are male characters always so sure and confident of themselves on screen. So, how is it that they never break down under vulnerable circumstances? So, a character like Raj, he might be very gentle, but I would still use the word conventional for him because in the end he is the hero of the film. He knows how to manipulate all situations to his and Simran's advantage. What makes Mansoor an outlier for me is that, firstly, all situations are not under his control. In many ways, he is a victim within the narrative. He tries to exercise his agency see over his life according to his desires, but ultimately there are his vulnerability is very clearly visible. The narrative does not obsessively try to make a hero out of him, or even if he is a hero, his vulnerability is clearly there. So as a consumer of film, that I don't see that very often. Like, there could be gentler and non-aggressive versions, but the vulnerability and helplessness of a character which makes it relatable for you, I haven't seen that very
In fact,
honestly.
it's very interesting that you choose Kedarnath because that has a couple of themes that are absolutely alien to the narrative of cinema that we have seen. One, his religion. Two, that he is quoting somebody from and the moment you do that these days, he's a Muslim, he's quoting the girl in love with him, and the girl he's falling in love with is a high caste Hindu. So that's one divide there. And uh, uh, and uh, and along with that, there's this thing about the environment sort of impacting their whole coming together. So so that's a very interesting way to sort of approach the character and the narrative. His social status, his economic status, his religious status, all of that coming together to sort of create that. And he's he's fighting those things, but not in a very uh, visible manner. His fight is more with himself. Is that what you see there?
Yeah, that, and also the fact that he is not always reflecting that indomitable spirit which we see so much in our heroes, that no matter how bad the things are, I'm gonna get it. There are clear, visible moments when he seems to have, I don't know, he seems to have lost it at some moments. I'm not sure whether that's a good word. What I'm trying to say is that um, as a person, don't always relate to male characters who are completely full of that indomitable spirit at all moments. I find a character who feels like a victim and who feels vulnerable at several moments were much more relatable. So the thing which made Mansoor very noticeable for me was that it's not like he was full of this courage or energy at all moments throughout the narrative. He was deep down in his heartbroken experiences at several moments, and he tried his best to attain things which he wanted. But I'll repeat the same thing which I said again, that there were, in the story of Kedarnath, there was the obsessive need to present the man as a I'll do it all, I'll fight it all kind of hero was not there. The depiction was much more human and
In
vulnerable.
fact, Somnath, one of the very interesting points in the essay that he makes, and I'd like to elaborate, both of you too. In fact, this is a question open to both of you because Bhaskar has obviously written it. But two aspects here in Kedarnath, you actually have, and after that we'll come to Dil Bechara also. In Kedarnath, you actually have the woman taking the initiative when it comes to the courting part. I think she's much more outgoing in that, and the kind of reaction that Bhaskar also mentioned. We are having this conversation that there's a moment when Mandakini, the girl, accidentally touches his palm, and the kind of frisson or excitement that comes onto the face, it's normally the opposite. It's the boy who reaches out and the girl is flushed with excitement, but here it is. And at the same time, there's this very understated thing which you are almost apt to miss, and Bhaskar sort of gets that very well in the essay, is this father connect, that missing father that Sushant's character, Mansoor's father, had gone off and never returned. And at the end, it is sort of, he loses his life primarily because I think there's this other boy that who comes into the picture, and whose father has to be saved, something like that. So could you comment on these two aspects? I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where to start, Shantanu, in this, because Bhaskar, do pardon me if I kind of my critique of your essay is as a mentor. I'm aware of my role. And as I said, because I'm been put in the role, I'm critiquing it. Otherwise, I have enjoyed your essay. So let's keep that as a baseline when I say anything. So do kind of take that into account, that I've been forced into a position of critique, being told to be a mentor. Shantanu, I'm re-emphasizing that.
Absolutely,
So one of the things which I want to think about is that the role, the character, and the narrative, all of this is part of mainstream cinema, right? So mainstream cinema generally very rarely goes against the grain of what is popular sentiment. And if you take that into account, I think the socio-political situations of today, the kind of things which concerns us, especially the metro crowd at times. The female agency is very much a conversation. It's no more on the margins. It's part of the hegemony. And male aggressiveness is frowned upon, especially again with the metro crowd. So what I'm trying to say, Shantanu, is that I am not surprised, and I'm keeping on saying that I think it's not just by accident that this has happened. All of this is very much a part of mainstream discourse. Can I, if you don't mind, Shantanu, can I put this in a bit of context? A larger,
Yes, please do.
Bhaskar is a 2000s boy, and his he has perhaps a narrower film bank. Let's put it then. You and me. I just want to go back a bit and try and talk about how the hero of Hindi cinema has generally reflected what the socio-political constraints times are. I mean, let's go back to Dilip Saab. Devdas. It's a classic archetypal hero who just wants to efface himself, right? He just wants obliteration of the self. It's an amazing, and in Sushant's sad death, I find a reflection coming back, of Dilip Saab. And what Sushant does, his final act, is to move away from the scene. He effaces himself, the body, completely in this final act. It is a lead up. But let's go back. So Dilip Saab, again, look at Raj Kapoor Saab. The Nehruvian hero incorporates the notion of the nation. The poor man always wins. The humble nobody. Rajesh Khanna, the romantic 60s, again, part of the world movement. Amitabh Bachchan, I think, is an extremely important one for so many reasons. As Shantanu very quickly pointed out, but didn't elaborate very much, Amitabh Bachchan's beginnings are in middle-class cinema.
Yes, absolutely.
Rishida, Basuda, this middle-of-the-road cinema is where he really makes a mark. Now look at, and I know that you set up Amitabh Bachchan, Bhaskar as the angry young man image against Sushant Singh Rajput. Now, Amitabh Bachchan's character is very much a personification of the times in two ways. One, despite his success in middle-class cinema, the Bollywood at that point, and Shantanu, you know much more about this. Bollywood is, Hindi films, and the industry is going through a very bad time. Taxation has hit them very hard. It's failing very badly. Amitabh turns the industry around. He's not an industrial hero in the sense of how we have looked at him as the angry young man. He is the saver of the film industry in the 1970s. He turns the industry around. So for me, more than the industrial dockyard hero, he's the industry's hero. He was needed at that point of time.
He was called the one-man industry at one point of time.
He turns it completely around. But behind him, again, as Salim Javed always will say, is that we wrote about the times and it was reflected in Bachchan. Bachchan had that person. So, and I can carry this conversation forward to the metrosexual Shah Rukh Khan.
Yes.
But if you see all this and you note all this, this is a reflection not of the anti-hero or the hero who is different. It's always of the times. If you take that logic, to me, Sushant's maturing as a human being is us, the metro circles, what we talk about, the women's emancipation which we see, and the ability to express desire is very much part of the Facebook, Twitter. I know that there is another right-wing suppressive movement on, but there is also unmistakably a huge audience who understands women's emancipation, desires. We talk about bisexual, gay relationships very openly. And as I mentioned, do perhaps, Bhaskar, especially you, do see this Dipti Naval film, though what was that film's name? Do Paiso Ki Dhoop, Char Aane Ki Barish. It's a phenomenal film. Rajat Kapoor as a gay man, Manisha Koirala as a prostitute. They phenomenally characters who are not part of the mainstream, but is in a Dipti Naval film, which not only does the film circuits, but is critically acclaimed here. So my point being, Bhaskar, that when you feel that you are not represented in mainstream films, you might have to see more films, right? And films beyond just the Times also, and you will find your representation there. In a sense, my mentoring conversation would be that one of the things that this essay perhaps needs to become to develop further, and I think there's a huge possibility of this essay to develop further into other journals and bigger chapters, if you want, is to open up the lenses of how masculinity has been represented. Yes, there is this huge thing of men chasing women and this notorious thing of the lover boy, constant harassment. There is that mainstream discourse, but there is other discourses also which have gone alongside, and we have reached a moment which it's frowned upon now. Now no one really encourages that kind of plain machismo. It's even if it happens, there's a crowd which frowns upon it. But to come back to Sushant Singh Rajput's moment and this thing, I think it's a hugely. I mean, I'm glad that you chose this films because it's hugely symbolic of what Sushant Singh Rajput actually did to the self, and this male body, just kind of takes it away. So in that sense, it's very symbolic.
Bhaskar, could you come in with Dil Bechara? Like what your take on that particular? We've talked about Kedarnath, and in fact, in Kedarnath, I also saw echoes of Titanic. If you see, like the upper class girl, the marginalized boy, and thrown against the calamities of nature. It was in Titanic also, between there's this iceberg thing happening, and so we have talked about that. But Dil Bechara, could we have your take on how that character sort of resonates, and why that character resonates with you? Again, it's a film very difficult to talk about because none of us can really separate that particular character or that film from the fact of how Sushant's life ended. So it's there's a very painful coming together of fact and fiction there. But could you talk us through Dil Bechara?
Okay, so as a film, Dil Bechara is very heartwarming and sweet. If you ask me about the character, I wouldn't say that the character resonates with me because it's a very typical conventional kind of character who does everything he can to rescue the heroine. I don't have any problem with that model. In fact, I do enjoy films like that. I think most films are based on that model. I personally don't find that model very relatable. The reason why Dil Bechara caught my eye is because there was that moment when the film approaches its climax, when the moment when Manny reveals that all this while the fear which he was helping Kizzy recover from, he is having the same fear all this while. For me, that's a very revealing moment because it shows that okay, even for a guy who aspires so hardly to be that hero, to be that savior, ultimately his reality is something different from that, right? He might have wanted to perform that role and be there for other people in his life, but the fact that his reality was shown in the end, the fact that he was not exactly as much in control of the situation or not as stoic as he would have wanted to be, that reality brings me relief. And again, in Kedarnath, at least the unconventional aspects are overly visible. In Dil Bechara, I doubt whether most viewers see the film through that lens, or whether they attach so much of importance to that moment. The reason why the plot resonates with me so much is that that moment is a subtle confession. It has the potential to be interpreted as something which reflects the need to begin a critical investigation into the molds in which male characters are represented. There's no problem with a man being a savior, but if that is the only model in which they are always being represented, I would say that is oppressive. And can I also respond to the previous comments, which
Absolutely, please, please. This is an open forum. You don't have to stick to one. Just make your points.
Yeah, so what you said about a display of female agency not being an unconventional thing anymore, yes, I agree with that. That was striking, that was not completely unconventional. What's unconventional for me is that, so so the thing is that heroism is always glorified because everybody wants to be in a position where they can control situations and circumstances around them, or when they can turn things to their favor. Nobody I consciously wants to be passive or helpless or vulnerable. The reason why an unconventional character resonates with me so much is that your life circumstances or the cultural norms around you or your own personality might not always enable you to attain that kind of ability, that agency. So people, for no fault of their own, do find themselves in very passive and helpless states at time. And when that kind of vulnerability or that kind of passive helplessness is represented on screen, it's for someone like me, it is therapeutic because it does give some hope that even
Yeah,
for people who do not always relate to that mold of obsessive heroism, there is scope for some kind of agency. Mansoor's agency in the film was limited, but it was there to some extent. He wasn't helpless, but he wasn't absolutely helpless. So a character like Mansoor might not be the object of people's fantasy, but some people have not been fortunate enough to live the fantasy. So when their reality is somewhat reflected on the screen, it does feel therapeutic. So my primary reaction to the film was emotional, and I'm just using reasons to justify my perspective, because in the end, it's all of this is not completely guided by reason. It's a mix of emotion and reason. So
absolutely.
so, so definitely masculinity is a spectrum. Like all male characters are not fit within one mold. So the examples which you keep on giving me, I don't agree that they are somewhat more gentler or non-aggressive versions of masculinity. The way in which I feel Mansoor is an outlier is that usually I think the model of heroism sustains in the film. It's somehow very essential for us that the man is able to turn the circumstances to his favor by the end or find some kind of resolution. Mansoor was a man who just tried to find his happiness. He got it to some extent, but there was some amount of determination and agency. But in the end, I think his helplessness prevailed. And, that's not, I don't think that's anybody's fantasy, but that's reality for some people. So that can be therapeutic. So the way in which I think Mansoor is an outlier is that the need to present the man as the hero is absent in the film. Mansoor, like, if I had to contrast it with Raj of DDLJ, Raj, for most parts of the narrative, is either very flamboyant or carefree, or when he's
It's
in love,
cocky. It's
yeah,
very cocky.
he is almost sure of his ability to get the girl. Mansoor is not always radiating with a lot of courage and optimism. He does feel defeated at several moments, which is human, I think. But throughout the tale, he does find sources of hope. The thing which is most striking about that relationship is that it's a display of female agency where the male gaze or masculine chase is almost absent. And I find that relieving because for some people, being in action might not be very relatable or might be oppressive, particularly when their life circumstances have made them helpless and vulnerable. So it's not that there's anything wrong with other models, but I find it very refreshing that a love story can exist even where there's neither an obsession to make the hero out of the man, nor is there obsession to keep him in action at all times. It's possible to show a story where even when he's in a state of passive wallowing, he still finds he's helpless, but he's not absolutely helpless. So that's
Yes.
subconsciously refreshing and therapeutic for me. So the obsessive need of heroism is absent in the film. And what you mentioned about films just being a response to cultural trends, I think it just proves my point that this reading of Kedarnath against the gender norms which I have done, I really don't. I doubt whether it was somebody's conscious intention, because I still don't find this thought reflected in our culture. So, which was why I said that it's, to me as a viewer, it looks like a fortunate accident. And I think your argument proves that, because you're also saying that films are just responses to cultural trends. And I don't think a man being passive was ever a cultural trend. We fantasize men being in action, we idolize men being in action. Whether aggressive or non aggressive, it's somehow very important to us that a man emerges victorious at the end of the narrative, or that he turns all his feelings of helpless into a desperate need to attain something.
Yeah. So there are a couple of questions, and then we'll have to sort of wrap up this conversation. So these are open to both of you again, and Bhaskar, one of the things that Somnath touched upon in the last time he spoke was, you know, a character in a film that an actor essays is not just about that actor. It's about the writer writing it for him, the director having his own vision on it, and film being a medium that filters through the camera, through editing. There's a lot of thing which the actor, of course, is the face of. So my first question, and I'll put both questions together. What do you think there was about Sushant that made him uh, get into these two characters so well? Obviously these are characters written by somebody else, conceptualized by somebody else, directed by somebody else. So what is it about Sushant vis-a-vis the other actors one might consider he was competing with? One is that question, and the second is the kind of the lack of agency or helplessness that you sort of talk about. Do you think he sort of made that almost come true with the final act of his life? The when he sort of gives up on everything and says, "ये दुनिया अगर मिल भी जाए तो क्या है?" So both these questions. One, what is it about Sushant that made him uh, be gel so well with these two roles, and does his final act add more substance to these roles than they otherwise would have? Both for Somnath and Bhaskar, whoever wants to come on this first.
Bhaskar, you go first.
Okay, so I don't attribute either the unconventional nature of Mansoor or the possibility of which is there in Dil Bechara to begin a critical investigation into masculinity, which the character of Mani has. I don't completely attribute it to Sushant Singh Rajput as a person. I have seen some of his other films. In fact, I don't think unconventional masculinity was anywhere his brand. Like you mentioned, Kai Poche and MS Dhoni. These are amazing films. The performance, as a viewer, I enjoyed his performances, but I wouldn't use the word unconventional for them. MS Dhoni is a very unconventional man simply because he plays cricket. I don't think he is relatable to an unconventional boy. And
That way, I think Bomkesh Bokshi was a much more unconventional character.
yeah,
Against Sushant Singh.
mm, The second part of your question about his life circumstances, um, I'm a little cautious about commenting on someone's life, but the manner in which his death was covered by the media and the kind of narratives which proliferated and the responses which people gave, I do think that the final event of his life also potentially reveals that there's something very flawed about our notions of masculinity. Even when a person unfortunately died, more than trying to understand what could have gone wrong, we are more obsessed with the need of making a hero out of him, because somehow not being able to do so disturbs us. That if a man we adore so much, if we are unable to make a hero out of him, is it an affront to him or is it an affront to our own notions of gender? Why can't we simply be empathetic to a person and his suffering and acknowledge all parts of him? I think when people go to unimaginable extents to make a hero out of someone, I think they're just soothing their own ego, because th- these people probably don't know enough about the life of that person, but they are still consumed by this obsessive need of proving that the person was victorious in the end. I think a more humane and empathetic response would be to speculate that how does a situation arise in life when living it starts seeming like a burden? Our consciousness never even veers towards the direction of mental health. And yes, I think the Sushant's personal like the way in which his life ended, and make his role in Dil Bechara more symbolic of the hint that there's something very flawed in our notion of masculinity, and I think it's essential that we deconstruct the model of the savior prototype of a hero and show more more realistic, more diverse, more emotionally diverse depictions of maleness on screen.
Somnath, closing words from you on both my questions and Bhaskar's.
Um, Not much to say. I take a lot from what Bhaskar's points are. I think one of the things which Shantanu, which we must agree on, is that Bhaskar's entry into this essay, which I'm slowly realizing, is a very personal entry. It's his emotions of what films he has seen and his reflections, rather than uh, a scholarly or merely a scholarly understanding of how um, heroes are presented in Indian cinema, because that would be a different question and a different entry point. So I appreciate that, Bhaskar. One of the things that, as a mentor, I would therefore ask you to make in that essay, if you might ever want to rethink it, is to clearly state it as you enter that these are your lenses. So the person reading is very sure of your parameters. So I think I misread it a bit, but as you speak, it becomes far clearer to me what your entry point and what your analytical lenses are. Shantanu, what was the other question?
That a character, that an actor is not merely the character.
Yes, indeed.
It's a director's vision, it's the writer's vision, and the fact that in Sushant's case, I think the way life unfolded for him and it ended has sort of also impacted the choice of the films that Bhaskar has used to.
Yeah, indeed. Again, in hindsight, we can talk about so much. We can infer too much. In fact, one of the classic cases would, of course, be to look at Gurudat's.
Gurudat, yeah.
Yeah, right. And therefore, what Kagas Ke Phool actually meant was there a premonition of his death in that film itself, which he made, he wrote, he directed. So a lot of things can be read. There's no end to it. Bhaskar clearly points out the insensitivity through which the mainstream media, particularly a few television channels, handled the event, which was, in bad taste yeah. So let's not go there. But again, I would want to reiterate that if we look at, there's always not. While one version of male characters might dominate, like the angry young man of the 70s. There are also always competing characters. If there was an Amitabh Bachchan, there was a Vinod Khanna, there was a Rajesh Khanna. The Khannas dominated.
Amol Palekar.
Indeed. I mean, I was going to come to that. Amol Palekar, Farooq Sheikh. Chashme Badur of the 80s. There are many ways of being male. And I think to kind of make this, you almost sometimes, Bhaskar, setting up that this is it, and therefore something which has happened is an antithesis towards it, or disproves or proves your case. I think all through cinema, and if we look a bit closely at all eras, even the 80s, we have great films. Chashme Badur of the 80s being a great example of different kind. Amol Palekar, I mean, the middle class Mumbai hero.
Everyman.
Your Everyman. We all love Amol Palekar movies. Dipti Naval as the opposite of, say, a dream girl Hema Malini. I'm just putting this very quickly. So there have been competing male narratives. Some, of course, resonate hugely with, one of the things, as you as an audience, Bhaskar, you say that you do not find yourself being represented. And I completely get that. I think Shantanu would agree with it. I would agree with it. But a lot of the Hindi film viewing audience, and as Amitabh Bachchan has said, that, they come to find respite. They do not want their reflection on screen. Otherwise Par or Damul would have been super hits. They want to find respite in Salman Khan or Sunny Deol going and beating up all of Pakistan. So therefore, you and I don't find our responses, and therefore we look for Amol Palekars and Farooq Sheikhs. But that is film stories. But I agree with a lot of what you have said, that and find and celebrate the joy and beauty with which Kedarnath and Dil Bechara works, and how it's working. I'm also, I'm very enthusiastic about the possibilities of film world. And one last hero I must mention, who also passed last year, and Shantanu and my favorite, is Rishi Kapoor. What a difference to Amitabh Bachchan, short, to the tall man, not being able to beat up, but he dances and sings away, right? There is a lot of male agency. I'm not taking that away, Yeah. So yes, passivity is not always represented very well in mainstream Bollywood, but there are instances. The one film which once I get to films, I can't stop. Rajnigandha, where Amol Palekar is completely passive. He doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
Leaves, goes out with another man, comes back. He's just sitting wanting to have his office politics and canteen and table tennis. So it's a brilliant way of being passive. But he gets the heroine in the end. That's also true. I'm done, Shantanu.
Thank you, Somnath. Thanks for that wonderful exposition. And Bhaskar, really glad of the subjects that you have articulated, and I hope thanks to TMYS and Koral and Sonal, this will get the kind of traction that we need to, so that there's more representation of the kind of people you would like to see, I would like to see, Somnath would like to see. Over to you, Sonal. Thank you so much, Somnath and Bhaskar. Sonal, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Batabyal. Thank you, Mr. Chowdhary, for such an insightful session. We have learned a lot, and I hope that this discussion only takes from here to pay a justified tribute to the icon. And may I ask a question, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. Please go ahead.
So actually, even Hollywood, actually regarding the non-normative masculinity on screen, even Hollywood actually portrays, even like from Marvel, our superheroes do have a panic attack and face existential crisis, and does not play any larger than life characters. So you believe that Bollywood will also take a leap from this, and if we look at the characters of Tamasha and Attach in the Ganj and Titli. So, are such characters going to be a part of the mainstream discourse?
Who is going to? Who is this addressed to?
Anybody.
No, Somnath, Bhaskar. Since I think superheroes are a very interesting genre of I haven't come across a superhero who does not have a very, very broken thing inside them, and that's what makes them superheroes, because they are transcending that, and that's where I think the Hollywood's narrative plays. But I think India has a very different culture. I think uh, uh, we've got to find our own ways to address uh, our own truths. Possibly the superhero truth is not the Indian truth, so to speak. But Bhaskar, what would you say? Because the superheroes have also been, the Marvel and the DC Comics superheroes have come to the cinema thing in the last 20-25 years more than anything else. Bhaskar, closing comments from you.
Uh, I'm not very deeply familiar with the genre, but I do want to make one comment. We might see superheroes having an existential crisis and a humanized version of themselves. But I think we are still not very comfortable with the idea that all boys may not even want to be superheroes, and I think to some people that might be an existential crisis. That w- what do those boys even want to be if not superheroes? I think that would trigger another discussion
Yeah,
altogether.
because at the end of the day, superheroes are not given the chance, the choice. They have been thrust. That role has been thrust upon them, and I
Can I
think,
comment on this?
yeah,
I think Rakesh Roshan was very correct, and he understood the Indian or Hindi film audience very well when he made Krish. Krish had to be embedded in the Indian family social drama, and then be he was not coming in from where Superman comes from, that planet. He was embedded in the Indian value system and then had to emerge. So the Indian superhero cannot come from Vulcan. That is not going to perhaps work. It has to be embedded in that larger narrative and paradigm, and then emerge from there to break through, the Indian family traditions.
there.
One
Somnath, over
more
to you.
thing I wanted to say. May I?
Sorry.
Yes, yes, please.
Yeah, so regarding what you said about my essay being more of my personal perspective and not a scholarly study of masculinity through the different eras, it's true. The motive behind writing the essay was very personal. It was more about finding a therapeutic release and expressing that lack of representation, which I feel. But largely, I also feel that a this is me speaking just as a student and a person, that a scholarly study just for the sake of academic intelligence, I don't think serves a purpose if it's not connected to the lived realities of people. So my purpose behind writing the essay was not so much to do a critical analysis of film for the sake of it. It was more about the psychological impact which films make upon the lives of children and youth. It
In
was more
fact,
from that lens.
yes, I would like you to, for your next sort of project, like you to go back in Indian cinema time and sort of find your personal, because I think at the end of the day, cinema is a very personal medium. Yeah, 500 people may be watching it together, but how I react to it will be very different from how Sonal or you or Somnath. So I'd like to see you write about how you personally, emotionally connect to, say, Dilip Kumar or Rajendra Kumar or Rajesh Khanna and come to Sushant Singh Rajput, So on that note, maybe, sir.
Are we stopping, or can I come back to this? This conversation carries on. Are we
No,
stopping?
it's,
Is it over?
Sonal,
no, no,
Sonal,
it's not over. It's not over.
it's open. It's open. It's open. Please come.
One final thing. Shantanu, actually disagree with you that film is a very personal medium. Today, I think it's a slightly different, and this is very off the cuff. I haven't theorized on it, but even before I see a film now, there are loads of reviews. You put out your tweets, and I go into a film with a lot of notions already, and the
Yeah.
personal perspective is already broken down. That is one. Second, I think once you see a film, again, today I just saw people commenting on this film. I saw Paglayat, and my perspective changed of what Paglayat actually told me and how feminist critiques on Facebook, very quick ones, suddenly made me rethink the ending and how I had seen it. Quite emotionally, didn't put on my feminist lens. And then I saw that again and rethought it. So I don't think it's that personal anymore. That is one. Second is films take on larger than life legends.
Yes.
I'm sure Bhaskar hasn't seen all the Angry Young Men movies, but he feels that he can mention it easily because he's part of that larger narrative. I feel what Dilip Kumar Saab actually did today in Devdas, but you and I know Devdas as a larger narrative, so I don't think it's that personal. So I think we are part of a cultural production, and films feed into it. Second, Bhaskar, if I may, and I put on my very stern mentor hat, very stern, and I will say this: when you're writing an essay, even if you choose to say this is not part of a critical essay, and critical essays serve no purpose. I think it's a cop-out. Bhaskar, you're a young student, and I say this as a far senior academic. I'll tell you. Okay, let me mention one flaw in the essay, one particular technical flaw. You talk about the male gaze, and you mention one particular author again and again, which is the in your biblio. But the male gaze is part of a larger film critique. Scopophilia was first talked about by Professor Laura Mulvey in the 1980s of how even women get incorporated in the male gaze, which is what you're talking about, right? So when we are doing film scholarship, we must at least address where ideas and themes come from. I'm not saying your mention is wrong. Your use is very appropriate. But the roots of that study goes back far longer, and it's not in the 2000s. The world critical film scholarship existed long before. So, again, the point being that I think it's Chowdhary you mentioned, is it?
Yes, Chowdhary.
Male gaze is a far older concept. In psychology, it goes back to Freudian, Jungian terms, and I can go on and on. But Laura Mulvey brought it into film criticism and the term scopophilia. So at least wave your hands when we write critical essays at where concepts come from. That is my only specific critique. Else, I enjoyed your essay very much.
So I think, Sonal?
Yes, sir. Sir, would you like to recommend an icon or an example from world cinema regarding the non-normative masculinity for younger students like Bhaskar Chaudhary?
James Dean?
Not masculine. Oh, okay. I don't know. Non-masculine.
I think over 3 films, he sort of epitomized a lot of this inability to break through, or for that matter, Brando in On the Waterfront. I could have,
the better one.
I could have been the.
Streetcar Named Desire really finds him unable to speak at all.
Yeah.
Not able to confront people at all. I'm also thinking in a very off the radar, Clint Eastwood, The Man with No Name, he breaks all Western paradigms. The classic Western. He's the man with no name. He enters and he leaves, does all the male things, but he has no identity.
Yes.
We can kind of the anti-John Wayne, the classic American hero.
Yeah. I think yes, James Dean, Marlon Brando in 2 or 3 of his classics.
I recently saw a film, a South Korean movie by Lee Chang-dong. It's named Peppermint Candy. So it was actually a very beautiful deconstruction into how a man actually came to be toxic masculine. And it was like his character came within the arc of backdrop of South Korean history. So Peppermint Candy.
I
haven't watched this. I'll have to. Thanks for the recommendation.
I'm really enjoying the South Korean films. I think they're brilliant in their violence and in they're just stunning. Those films. They break so many narratives. It's really. I'll watch this tonight.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. It was such an interesting and enjoyable session. And on behalf of TMY's Review, I would like to pay our sincere gratitude for guiding us as the mentor. And thank you, Mr. Chaudhary, for moderating the session. And look forward to many more sessions with you. And thank you,
Yes,
Mr. Bhaskar Chaudhary, for projecting something so personal on the table. And we wish you a very good luck in your future academics. And thank you, sir. And
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you.
Bhaskar, thank you very much.